Now, the current state of politics in the UK has thrown up a number of uncertainties. Voter political allegiance is one of them. So are the politically homeless looking for a new party, one that's neither too left nor too right, but very centre? This is Roundtable. Me, David Foster. A moderate, sensible, visionary voice of the people. After what many would say is the shambles of Brexit, would voters in the UK be open to a centrist party? It did happen in France. Emmanuel Macron at the Elysee is evidence of that. Is a British political revolution quietly building?
Britain has been ruled by political moderates for decades. It was a country where voters tended to avoid extremes.
The important thing is that everybody who has a vote shall be able to use it.
John Major's Conservatives, Tony Blair's New Labour project, and the coalition which followed often looked for a centre ground. But with the country's leading parties now lurching further left,
we're not the party of the billionaires,
and to the right, has that created a gap in the middle? Are conditions ripe for a new moderate force in British politics to inspire those who feel politically homeless? Or has centrism had its day? Centrists were left with few options at the general election. The Lib Dems looked closest to a moderate ticket, offering a rethink on leaving the EU. But voters weren't impressed. Instead, Jeremy Corbyn did better than expected. His leftist ideas scored high with young voters and ripped away Theresa May's majority.
I think a lot of voters felt they had to choose, they had to come off the fence. The Brexit issue didn't play for the Lib Dems in the way they hoped. A lot of voters who voted to remain felt that we should get on with it and actually leave the EU.
After that, is there anywhere for centrist Brits to turn, or are they stuck in the political wilderness? There is one newcomer centrists can look to across the English Channel. Emmanuel Macron swept a victory in France this year, styling himself a moderate, neither left nor right. His victory showed a centrist message can still win votes. But Macron's rise was unique. He set up his party in 2016 and had the appearance of an outsider, smashing more established French parties and offering something new. Could there be a British Macron waiting to happen?
In the short term, no. If Jeremy Corbyn had suffered a heavy defeat, which many people in his own party, even people close to him, expected, then the moderates, the centre-right people within the Labour Party, the people who supported Tony Blair, they might well have started their own centre party.
There are signs of life in the British centre. Brexit has dragged some from the UK's left and right together. Labour's Chuka Umunna teaming up with Conservative Anna Soubry to form a cross-party group opposing hard Brexit. And the political climate has even seen the return of this man. Blair says his opposition to Brexit has motivated him to get more involved with politics. Critical of both Corbyn and May, he says the centre needs urgent renewal. He also says it's an open question whether he'll return to the front line. Recent political shocks may have shown voters want radical change.
What do we want? Brexit! Why do we want it? No!
But Macron shows a centrist platform can still win and may offer some hope to British moderates that their time can come again.
Well, with me at the round table today, the British politician Lord Paddy Ashdown. Beside him, the public relations executive, former political editor of the Daily Mail, James Chapman. To my left, Professor Richard Whitman from the University of Kent, and also joining us, Labour Party activist Abby Tomlinson. We're going to ask you for the young person's view, Abby, in just a moment on what is wrong. But Paddy, you've got this new movement to which you've got, what, 90,000 people have come in more united. What is wrong?
The one thing I think you can say with certainty is that British politics cannot remain in this shape. You cannot have a country like ours with all the breadth of opinion, with all its tradition of respect, tolerance, the habit of compromise, moderate views, represented by two political parties, one of which is UKIP, in terms of its policy with a nicer face. How much nicer is a matter of debate, and the other of which proposes a return to the 1950s style socialism. Something has to happen in our politics to represent the new left out, the new voiceless, which is the great moderate swathe of opinion who in the past have always determined those who win and lose elections. I mean, it's never the case, if you look back in most of the years of the 20th century, that elections have ever been won from the extremes, and yet this, the fulcrum of our nation, now remains completely unrepresented.
And yet, James, if you take a look at what happened in the 1980s with senior members still of Paddy's party, they tried it with the SDP, and every time it's launched in Britain, it doesn't seem to work.
Well, I agree with that, but I agree with Paddy. We're in a different situation now to the 1980s. I mean, whatever you thought of Margaret Thatcher, she was astride the centre ground of British politics. And you had one party which at that time had gone off to an extreme. We now have both of our main political parties. As Paddy has said, I agree with him entirely. It's a Conservative UKIP coalition leading the Conservative Party from an extreme. And you have a Labour Party which is effectively run by Marxists. I think that you can actually tell something about the health of a democracy when you look at who's on the backbenches of the political parties. There are better people on the backbenches of the Tory and the Labour Party. I'm thinking of people like Rachel Reeves, Pat McFadden on the Labour side. On the Tory side, people like Anna Soubry, Nicky Morgan, Dominic Grieve, Ken Clarke. You know, these are centrist politicians who should, on merit, be on the front bench of their parties. They're not, because the two parties are captured by their extremes.
Maybe you can shout this as loud as you like from the rooftops, but is it going to change?
I mean, it's tough to break in the British system, of course, because the first past the post. But what we do know, when we have a different electoral system for the vote, such as the European Parliament elections, that you do have the possibility for other parties to break through. So, you know, there is this lock that makes it very difficult for parties to emerge. But as Paddy will know, I mean, the Liberals, as they were then, and the Social Democratic Party formed an electoral alliance, and they won seats on that basis. So it's not impossible to form a coalition in the centre and to win seats on that basis.
Let's ask Abby. I hope I'm not being rude in asking how old you are.
I'm 19.
You're 19. Do you feel politically abandoned?
I wouldn't say I feel politically abandoned. I'm obviously still a member of the Labour Party, although it's not quite where I'd like it to be. But I think in terms of what young people are feeling like now, they're feeling quite represented. We saw an increase in youth voter turnout. I know certainly, like, among my friends at university and everyone I knew, they were more involved in this election, whether that be involved in the Tories or involved with Labour. So I think it's quite interesting to see that there are not a lot of young people who feel politically abandoned, I don't think. I think we're kind of happy either side.
I think you'd agree with me that the great surge, and it was a phenomenal achievement of Labour and Momentum in particular, to have brought all those young people into politics, very good thing. And yet all of them are overwhelmingly pro-Remain in the European Union, and the party they voted for is led by a leader who is clearly against that, as indeed is their official policy. So you might conclude from that that, yes, they felt a certain attraction to a political movement that seemed to give them the voice, but they were voting for something they don't actually believe in. So I'd be a bit surprised if some of those guys weren't feeling a bit unrepresented.
Well, yeah, I voted for Remain as well, but I think the problem is that young people kind of want to win, and we want to be in government. Obviously, the party that was advocating for sort of staying in the European Union.
Young people want to win rather than be principled?
No, we want to be, our values to be in government, which is why a lot of young people are very pro-Remain. In fact, Labour could have been more pro-Remain, voted for Labour instead of the Liberal Democrats, because it was clear the Liberal Democrats
we're getting a little parochial for an international audience.
But it is an interesting thought that, you know, young people have changed politics in the past by being principled and radical. The idea that young people would lend a vote, that vote being for Remain, to a political party that votes the other way, seems to me to be pretty inconsistent and pretty unstable.
You mentioned in passing in other occasions, En Marche.
Yes.
Emmanuel Macron's party in France came total political outsiders, and he becomes president, then the party gains support. But that isn't going to happen because we don't have a presidential system in this country.
I don't think it depends. Forgive me, you want to go around the others. You know, I think this depends far less on the president than the personality. It's true to say that we lack a Macron. I don't believe Macron himself will do as well as he thinks he will do, but I think it's indicative of a mood in the country. My guess is if you get one person, two or three people highly respected in politics, I could think of names you might put to that, who would come forward and say this is the way we want to go. I suspect you would have to find at least as big a movement towards them as you saw in Oman.
Well, this is where I was going to come to you about, because you mentioned in an interview back in the summer that you had 2 cabinet ministers expressing interest in joining your Democrats party, which hasn't launched.
It hasn't launched, and there's a question for Paddy's party about whether it wants to be the vessel for this. Vince Cable has talked about the Liberal Democrats being the vessel into which all of these centrist politicians could pour.
Listen, if I were critical of the Lib Dems, I would say they've been too tribal in the very moving sphere of politics. They should have been much less tribal. And I was saying that to Tim Farron privately, and I've been saying it publicly. But I don't think that this is going to be done by saying, you know, you all join my party. I actually think that what I want to see the Lib Dems is the centre of a gathering point. A movement, exactly.
Perhaps as described by James.
Yes, well, but the really important thing to establish here, David, is this, that actually the people you want to reach aren't necessarily the people diminishing in number inside the political circle. It's the millions outside politics who desperately want this but don't want to do it through a political party. En Marche's capacity was to reach out beyond the political circle to others outside and create that movement, and I think that's what we.
And I think as the sort of illusions of Brexit, as the illusions of Brexit fall away, and we're seeing the economy turn very clearly here in the UK. We've gone from being the leading country in the G7 in terms of growth to the lowest growth, and I think that the scales are falling from people's eyes. Actually, a lot of those people who voted to leave on the basis that we're going to have a land of milk and honey, we could have our cake and eat it, in the words of our Foreign Secretary. That's very clearly not the case, and I think as time goes on, that disillusion will grow, and the people will, you know, don't forget, 48% of the population here in the UK voted to remain, and they're they're politically homeless. Do you
see opportunists here who simply want us to have a second vote on the EU, or does it go much further? Because you both want that to be changed, don't you?
Look, the question really is this, that in or out of the European Union, what kind of country do you want? I guess most of the people who feel as I feel, Abby probably feels the same way, actually would want to remain in the European Union and would see a second referendum as a useful thing to do from a democratic point of view. But it's much more than just Europe. I mean, it's about what kind of country do you want, whether we stay in the European Union or not.
So do you think it's political opportunism? Or
no, I don't think it's opportunism. And if you look at public opinion, I mean, public opinion now is pretty much split down the middle when you just ask the question of a second referendum or in or leave. I mean, that's been consistent now, I think, since the vote, and within the era of margin. So I think, you know, it would be very difficult to call where a referendum would be. But I think what's more interesting is the way that there is a sort of discontent with party politics, which was there before. And I think what we've seen over the last 18 months or so, in many ways, it's reinforced a lot of the things that were pejorative about British politics. It's become far more tribal, but it's become far more extreme. You know, the two main political parties, Labour and the Conservative Party, were essentially coalitions in the past. You know, they were coalitions of quite different sets of interests. Now they are parties which are really driven by quite ideological and a fairly narrow spectrum of sort of political views in comparison to where they were in the past. So logically, there should be a space in the centre to appeal to the...
And Abby, did you just see a bunch of middle-aged men represented to some extent by those of us around the table, but also in the political establishment, thwarting pretty much everything that you and your generation want to see happen?
I think, especially after Brexit, there was a sense among young people that the future had been taken away by those older than them, and there was a sense that, you know, it was going to be their future, and we didn't really have a say in it, in the sense that obviously we're now leaving the European Union. But I don't think there's actually an appetite for a second referendum among young people, because there's a lot of Remainers who actually think that now people have voted for leave, that's what we should do, that it's sort of undemocratic to now say, well, no, let's just have a second referendum because we didn't get the result we wanted. So I think although young people are angry at Brexit, they're not seeking to change it in the same way that I think people around this table.
This is so interesting, David, and I think you've got to come back now to James's. I think Abby, by the way, expresses the view very accurately. But we're now in a moving dynamic. I think that as this country goes into the winter and the turn of the year, I think we are going to see economic very hard times. The cost of Brexit will come home to roost amongst ordinary people. It will be felt by them, not just the elite. And I think you are also beginning to see it, but the budget's going to be very, very tight, no money for public services. I think you may see the beginnings of a collapse of public services, beginning with the NHS.
And
then you have the third thing, which is this government is incapable of delivering anything. It can't deliver a hard Brexit, it can't deliver a soft Brexit. I don't think they can get the House of Commons to vote for a crash landing Brexit, over the edge of the cliff Brexit. So under those circumstances, the government's inability to do anything is actually one of the factors that leads them to be unable to
fill a void.
Well, I think, you want my guess, I think this government will collapse in on itself in the early months of next year. But what is very clear is that in these circumstances, where the failure of the government is one of the reasons you can't deliver Brexit, I think you may find that a second referendum is the only way out of a stalemated parliament.
Let's put that to one side for the moment and talk about the totemic figure that Paddy suggested might be needed in this, and your suggestion that there were 2 cabinet ministers at least who might like to join.
It's more than that. I mean,
your
don't
party.
forget
Well, give us names.
Well, I won't do that because
George Osborne. No, I mean, he's no longer in the cabinet.
He's a newspaper editor now, so I don't.
Well, I know, but he was a cabinet minister once, and he could be a cabinet minister again.
George can speak for himself. I don't speak for George any longer. I did at one point in my career. But look, you've got 48% of the population voted to remain. There's another third of the population didn't vote at all. So it's different from the. It's different, I think, from the 1980s when you had Margaret Thatcher astride really the centre ground of politics. The centre ground of politics is abandoned at the moment, and Paddy's party is trying to represent it. But there is a huge space. Well, I'm interested you say that.
No, it is. I mean, unfortunately, it is.
I think the Lib Dems should rebrand. I've suggested a party called the Democrats, which would take in these great swathes of the centrists in the Labour and the Conservative Party.
I think you got it wrong. But listen, Dave, we're into techniques here.
Yeah, but I mean,
let me make this proposition to you, David. I'll make it as a prophecy.
You're offering me a job?
My guess is, it's only between us. I mean, who's I think there will be an attempt to establish some centre party, and I think it'll come quite soon. And I think my worry isn't not that is it going to happen, because it is, but it's going to happen in the right way to make it succeed, and that's what worries me. I'm not sure it's going to do that. But there are things stirring in this forest, and I think the call for something which begins as a movement to gather those voices, not just in politics but beyond politics, I think will be made.
I think that's an important point. We can get obsessed with parliamentary politics, but we're talking about an issue which is, sort of cleaving the country, and one where the real effects of the public policy choice or lack of choice has real direct consequences for individuals. And I think in that kind of a context, the sort of normal business of parliamentary politics doesn't work. And I think we've already seen, a sort of move towards an enthusiasm for extra parliamentary politics, and that's one of the reasons why Corbyn has been successful in his Labour leadership, because he's reached out beyond.
And it may be that Abbey and her generation have shown us the way. Actually, you guys felt we cannot be excluded any longer. We demand to be heard. Now, you chose the Labour Party, right or wrong. Let's wait to see. But if you were to create something of the sort you're talking about, that people felt they could engage in who didn't want directly to join one of the present political parties, I think you've got something which could happen.
So if there was a centre ground party that had people, you supported Stephen Kinnock, Anna Soubry, Vince Cable, if these people all came together, he's not going to leave the Lib Dems, but I mean, if there were a centre party that represented that, would you switch from the Labour Party? Would you move towards it?
I wouldn't, no, because I think to have values and principles, you need to be able to put them into action. I think realistically, a centre party is never going to gain enough votes to actually, gain any parliamentary seats. Although it could have an effect on the discussions in holding the government to account, I don't think it's going to attract young people, especially because if you've got sort of people like Stephen Kinnock, and then you've got, say, like Tories in the same party, they're going to agree on this one thing, but they're going to disagree on so many other things that it's not going to be a stable party.
It really isn't true. I mean, and I know it isn't true because of More United. More United set out 5 basic principles, but you agree with every single one of them, by the way. And it then brought together people of all parties and none, who are prepared to raise money and campaign to be elected. And by the way, 35 of them have been elected across the parties in this parliament. So I just don't think it's true that young people will be happy to commit themselves to a party that does not believe what they believe in on the key issue of Europe in order to make sure that Labour wins. I think if you put together something which assembled do you support these basic principles? And if you do, come and work with us. I think that's going to be a better way. Don't think party, think movement.
The principles that Paddy just mentioned: opportunity, tolerance, democracy. Democracy. We want you to have real influence over politics, environment, and
internationalism,
and openness. But Abby's point is the most sensible one, surely, that it's really not going to make any difference because we have a status quo.
Okay, say that to Montmartre. That's exactly the way they began.
Yeah.
They laid out the principles, they got a people's movement going, and they create... We've got to stop thinking political party. It may end in a political party. Indeed, I think to have political effect, it must, but it begins as a people's movement. And my guess, if that thing does take off, lots and lots of people... By the way, no one's saying you have to leave the Labour Party to join the movement. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
We borrowed that from the Women's Equality Party. So join the movement and let's see where you get to. My guess is it will happen and it will end up with a political party.
Are you going to fall in with Paddy, or has he got to fall in with your idea of the Democrats? Or
well, I'm not an activist. I have a day job, but I think...
You're with Bell Pottinger still?
Well, it's
exactly, day job?
Day job. I had a day job.
Okay.
But I'm seeking another one. But look, I think that there's an enormous space in the centre of British politics in a way that we haven't seen for a very long time. There are people who feel politically homeless. And actually, Abby's point about the Labour Party, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is hell-bent on a hard Brexit.
Yeah.
And if you look at politicians like Stephen Kinnock, who you mentioned, but you look in the Conservative Party, people like Anna Soubry, so on, they're looking at their parties and thinking, do they have more in common with the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Duncan Smith on the hard right of the UKIP right, really, of the Conservative Party, or do they have more in common with people like Stephen Kinnock, Rachel Reeves, these centrist Labour politicians? Tony Blair won 3 elections in a row in this country for a reason, because the elections are won from the centre.
Yeah.
We now have an unprecedented situation where both parties have been seized, the leaderships, by their extremes. That's not happened before. So these politicians, and they're about 60% of I would estimate, of the House of Commons, have more in common with members of different parties than they do with the leaders.
But the essential precondition is electoral reform and proportional representation. And by the way, Jeremy Corbyn and Labour is wholly opposed to any reform of the electoral system. I don't believe young people believe in that.
I think that's absolutely prerequisite for the medium and the long term. But I think in the short term, we face major public policy challenges. In effect, you're leaving the EU, and on the other hand, you're remaking huge swathes of British public policy, which means, I think, the sort of old party political divide has to break down, because the starting principles, for example, on environmental policy, on agricultural policy, on competition policy, and so on, they don't just require a sort of party political viewpoint. They require a set of principles and a philosophy which would inform a new UK policy, assuming the UK leaves the EU. And I think that's why there is more of the potential for foment in terms of, sort of party political identity, including in the Commons and the Lords, than we've seen in any recent modern...
I want to ask Abby what she's taken from today. If anything.
I think I've taken from today... I think I've got a better grasp of sort of the centre ground of British politics now and sort of what the actual goals of the movement is. But I think I've also there hasn't been much mention of politics outside of Europe, which I think is sort of more important in a lot of young people's minds. A lot of people's minds, they think of, cutbacks, they think of what their parents are having to save on, what they're having to save on, what support they're not getting out from the government. They don't just think of politics in terms of Europe, and I think I've learned that needs to be like a broader discussion when you're thinking of movements.
We're seeing it already. Parliament's energies are going to be consumed. They're being consumed by Brexit.
It's the only
so these issues you highlight, which matter to young people, this is going to consume our Parliament for a decade or more if it goes ahead. So I think it's, and as time goes on, people are realising it's not as simple as having a cake and eating it. And
but Abby is right. Our obsession with Brexit, perhaps justified, James, is masking the other things we want about our country. My guess is young people really do believe in environmental policies, really do want to see electoral reform, really would like to see a breakdown in tribalism. And it's odd to me, and I think strange, very bad fit, all these radical young people who believe in things like non-tribalism, electoral reform, and Europe, which actually the Labour Party officially does not believe in. It seems to me odd that. Abby, am I wrong?
I think young people have just seen, they're very disillusioned with politicians, obviously, before Jeremy Corbyn came in. And the thing is, he's different, he's new. He's not like those old politicians that have let them down. And he offers them something new. I think that's why they're drawn to him, because he's not like the rest.
And I think there's a message in that, if I may, I think if somebody does arrive to lead, as it were, a central movement, some or a collection of them, they've got to look much more informal politicians. I think Jeremy Corbyn's style of politics is extremely attractive.
Do we know that person yet? Is that person already in politics, or will it
I think the person
Macron?
probably has to be in politics, and I think you could play around with a few names, but I'm not going to.
One thing
Well,
I
maybe
would
later.
One thing I'll play around with some names who shouldn't be involved, and I think that if Tony Blair and David Miliband are involved, the toxicity of that means that it will be. And a part of Jeremy, why do we have Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party? It's partly a reaction against Tony Blair and everything he stood for. So if you know, Chuka Umunna is a name, he's a former shadow cabinet minister. He's being a name that's floating around as sort of Tony Blair's, Peter Mandelson's candidate to lead some new sort of centrist movement. Let me tell you this: if Tony Blair's name is associated with this new movement in any way, it will be stillborn. He's a very toxic figure, whether his fans like it or not. If it looks like a Blairite,
no, he hasn't. To be fair. But I honestly
he's getting
think,
there, though, Paddy. He's
maybe,
edging ever closer.
My guess about Tony Blair, not that I know personally, is that he would share every word of that. I don't think he understands that, given his past, he would be toxic in these circumstances. Well, he's a clever politician.
If as they say, and have maintained for a long time, a week is a very long time.
Well, watch this space.
What's going to happen over the next couple of months, couple of years? Thank you all very much indeed. A debate's what we wanted, and a debate was what we got. I hope it's satisfied you to some extent.
It has.
Thanks for coming on Roundtable from me and the team. We'll see you next time, I hope. Bye-bye for now.